Right, OK, well I want to put a proposition to you about how all this unfolded, and I think both Andrew Robb and Bill Shorten accepted this, that the leaks were very, very damaging. Now, one person was responsible for those leaks. Laurie Oakes, Peter Harcher knows who that person is. Somebody out there probably cost Labor a majority government.
I think both of those individuals say that it was a series of sources, not just a single source. So
yeah, but the original leak came
of someone.
The original leak came from one person. I think both Laurie Oakes and Peter Harcher then confirmed the information with other people. But the original leaker was solitary.
Actually, I think there were a couple of leakers, because there was the stuff about things said in cabinet meetings by Gillard about the age pension, etc., that I think probably came from another source. So we don't know. But I think it was instructive that the minute that Julia Gillard made her pilgrimage to sit at the feet of a disdainful Kevin Rudd in Brisbane, looking over maps and things like that, where he took charge, the leaks from that moment, whatever deal was struck, the leaks from that moment stopped dead.
Not only took charge, but refused to cooperate, really. I mean, he made it certain that picture opportunity wouldn't work.
And you notice also that Lachlan Harris, his former media advisor, from that moment was deputed to stick by his side and run shotgun on him. So I think there's clearly is the suspicion, and a very deep suspicion, that he's the man, and I think now he's the man that cost them the election.
And for the first one, Barry, as has been pointed out endlessly to me by people in the Labor Party, there are only 3 people in that conversation, and 2 of them weren't going to be doing that kind of leak. So however it came from Kevin Rudd, the first. That's the view of the party.
Well, let's hear another point of view from one of the vanquished, Maxine McHugh, who lost Bennelong to John Alexander.
Clearly, you cannot have the removal of a Labor leader and a Prime Minister, and then 2 months later have an election and not have that play into the outcome. I think the singular achievement of the government has been the fact that we have a national unemployment rate of 5.3%. Everyone I know has got a job.
Not everybody after last night. Now,
she's right though, and so is Rob Oakeshott. I think that this campaign is a confluence of factors. The reason why they got thrown so off guard by the leaks is because they had nothing else substantive in a national sense going on.
Sure, but doesn't her point go more to election timing? I think she's suggesting that had they held off, then the Rudd factor might not have been as significant.
I think that is a strong possibility. Julia Gillard went to this election far too early. She hadn't properly introduced herself to the Australian people as Prime Minister, and she hadn't given the Rudd problem time to, if possible, sort itself out. And if they had waited till October, those 2 things could have well been managed.
But she couldn't wait till October hanging around in her flat in Canberra, or she couldn't have moved into the lodge and been Prime Minister. I just think that would have fomented the dissatisfaction with the perception that she was a kind of puppet Prime Minister. I mean, you can't do that for
I think you're right. I think you're right to some extent, Annabelle, that delaying it too much was a mistake. But I think there's another factor in the rush to the election that took me by surprise. I thought she would wait a couple of weeks, and that is that she had a number of things she really wanted to do in a hurry, and that was the deal with East Timor and the mining tax. These are things
and the People's Assembly.
And the People's Assembly. All 3 big decisions came unstuck because they were rushed, they were incomplete, they fell over either in ridicule or, in the case of the East Timor Assembly, a detention centre, the East Timorese didn't even really know about it, and that was the rush that really killed her. She didn't mark a breach, she marked a continuation of the Bunga.
I think they always had a structural problem with their campaign, because there are 4 things you can run on: your leadership, your record, your policy, or your party. Now name one of those things that wasn't tainted by getting rid of Kevin Rudd. When they got rid of their leader, then they had a leadership problem with Julia Gillard. They had a problem with their record because they couldn't run on that. Their one big policy idea for the future was the NBN, which was a pretty thin thing. And at best, their party brand was neutral in some states and absolutely toxic in others. So that problem ran from the start.
And the Kevin Rudd thing, like week 2 and 3 were destroyed. I don't think a political party has had to face something like that in the past. But this, what you're about to see now, it all came out of the last week of the campaign when people were really making up their minds. Here it is.
If the Labor Party felt that Kevin Rudd had to be deposed, how are you and your government's policies going to be so radically different that we should entrust you with our vote?
Trust is something that is very important that I see in politicians. How do you reconcile what you did by removing Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister in the manner you did?
The Rudd factor, as it's been deemed, is clearly still there as a factor in this campaign.
If you win this election, you will be a Labor hero. If you lose, will challenging Kevin Rudd for the leadership be the greatest mistake of your life?
Oh, look, it's not about me.
No, it was about Kevin Rudd. That was the problem. But what we did there, of course, is just running all the questions, and that was kind of characterised the campaign. I've never seen a campaign like it where the questions became more important so often than the answers.
But, look, you saw with Andrew Robb, you saw with Brian Loughnane earlier today in another interview, another station, the Liberals are not going to now feed the idea that removing Kevin Rudd was in fact the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. I think the defeat would have been worse. They would have had to, Labor would not have been able to escape talking about its record. I think it's a mistake to think that it is a mistake to have removed him. But it came at a cost, obviously.
Yeah, big cost.
But you will see the Liberals wanting to egg on this idea that Maxine McHugh so foolishly suggested that it was a mistake to remove Kevin Rudd. They want the party to be torn apart in recrimination.
Do you think it's the suddenness of the change that's really puzzled people? Because, I mean, that's what this result says to me. It's just national puzzlement, you know, because there's such little difference between the two parties. It's kind of unsurprising that the national result should be a resounding, huh? You know, and that's what it is. And part of it is this kind of, and you saw it in all of those questions at those public forums, a genuine bewilderment as to if things were so terrible, how was it that we didn't know? And surely those who sat in the cabinet privately having these frustrations and concerns and doing nothing about it have to think about that.
Call it the Hawke of Britain effect, where everything is perfect until the moment that it's not, and then hail the new Queen.
And federal elections are very much about leadership, and people want certainty, and what they did was they piled a political uncertainty on top of economic uncertainty at a time when people didn't want it, and that was a real problem for them. But I agree with the others too. I think it would have been worse under Kevin Rudd.
And Dennis, the real Julia factor, how big was that?
Well, again, I think that was the right thing to do. But you know, as with so many things this government has done and the Labor Party has done over the last 3 years, the way they did it was appalling. You know, to announce to the world that I am now going to be the real Julia, rather than, you know, changing her style and just letting that happen as a matter of course. You know, to announce it to the world, it became a joke. You know, who was the other person?
I think look, I'm torn. That was my instinctive reaction too. But I have to say, in retrospect, I think it worked. In that, although there was all that ridicule you're talking about, for a couple of days, all the attention was on Julia. It coincided with suddenly the coalition having nothing to say. For the next week, that was in fact, when she said that heralded a week that was the best of the campaign for Labor.
And that night was the first night where the news services didn't lead with Kevin Rudd. And I think that maybe in those circumstances, yes, it looked yucky, but I think you've got to spend something to gain something. And I mean, really, by offering up, you know, that sort of opportunity for mockery, I think that, you know...
I also think it coincided with her actually putting together more interesting, not broadband, it was the education reforms. She talked about, she jumped the...
but linking it into broadband was important, and I think that is what actually formed the beginnings of a national campaign in the last week or two. I mean, and tying the health stuff into it.
And you talked about spending something to gain something. What about a train track in New South Wales? Was that the answer?
One of the dumbest... there were two things that stand out in this. One was the Citizens' Assembly, which tied Julia Gillard to the corpse of Kevin Rudd, doing exactly the same sort of stuff. And the other one was this, which did what the coalition wanted to do all the way along, which was to tie Julia Gillard to the stinking corpse of the New South Wales government. They could not have possibly done it more effectively.
And tie Maxine McHugh to the tracks, by the way.
Yes, and should they have known, just before you go on, Andrew, let's hear now from Julia Gillard, and I think you get the sense that maybe they should have had a sense that might have been the result. Here she is.
Look, the Labor government in New South Wales has obviously had its set of problems. One, I think that there is cynicism about government delivery, but I understand people have heard a lot of policies before, and some of how they respond to these things is informed by that past experience.
The question is now that Maxine McHugh has lost her seat, and this was the one seat in particular that Labor hoped to save by this $2.6 billion little rail link. Will it now go ahead?
All you need to know about the rail link story can be found inside the Daily Telegraph on Friday, where a full-page Liberal Party ad appeared that consisted of a tear sheet of the original news story about the announcement. Now, you know if your opponent is using your good news announcements in an ad, that it hasn't really
But I think it has
worked out.
ramifications for state Labor now.
Yep.
What does the New South Wales state government now do with a rail link that it hadn't budgeted for, that will require taking resources from elsewhere, now that Gillard is either not going to be in
Ask
government...
the independents.
You know what they
is
try and do?
really
They try and get 20% of the primary vote at the next state election. That's their aim.
Yeah. How close to Kennedy can you get with that rail link?
Divert it. Next time, turn up with an actual locomotive, I guess, is the kind of the lesson from all of this.